Well, hello. It is Cloud Builder Live for November. Man, I am thrilled. This is, we've had a lot of episodes now. We've covered a lot of different topics. I'm thrilled that you all chose to join us here to dive in for this next to last episode for 2022. And we're going to be diving into talking about something I think that's really interesting. We're going to be kind of continuing on this trend of looking at containers. We've looked at Kubernetes. We're going to be looking at some different services. In this episode, we're going to be talking about AWS Copilot. So I hope you're excited about it because, as I mentioned in the comments just a minute ago, this tool can truly be a lifesaver. Now, with that being said, I do want to hear, I know we posted in the chat, where are people joining from? I really want to know this too. So go ahead and post in the chat where you're joining from and if you're running any container workloads in the cloud. And if so, I'm just curious to know what tools are you using, right? Are you using Kubernetes? Are you using ECS? Are you deploying containers on Lambda? Just let me know. And if you're brand new to containers, put that in there too. I just want to know kind of where everybody's coming from. So be sure you're posting here into the channel. Now, let me just cover why we do what we do here on Cloud Builder Live. So first of all, Cloud Builder Live is indeed all about helping you actually build real solutions in the cloud instead of just knowing about cloud services. This really is the crux of it, because one of the things I noticed was that a lot of people would get certifications, but they wouldn't yet know maybe how to go out and actually build something. Now, we're going to do something here at the start that I never do. I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to show you this tool right at the very beginning. I'm going to start a deployment and then we're going to go talk about it. Now, I'll give you a reason. Part of the reason I'm doing this is because it's going to take about 11 minutes for this deployment to complete. So this gives us a chance to then go back and do all the talk about it. But I'm going to go ahead and pull things up here so you guys can see the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up VS Code, which I've actually already got up and running here. Now, the first thing, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is that Copilot actually does use the AWS CLI. So I'm going to go ahead and set my correct profile here. We'll talk all about that in a minute. You're like, what is this? That's okay. That's okay. So first of all, see somebody joining from Arizona. Awesome. Glad you're joining us. I'm sure it's much warmer there than it is here right now. I'm going to go ahead and from here, I'm going to go ahead and run the command that we're going to spend our time talking about today, which is Copilot. And I'm just going to run Copilot init. Perfect. So you'll see here that it actually gives me an option to specify a name for an app. And again, I'll explain all this in just a minute. I'm just going to go ahead and enter in a name. And then it's going to ask for which workload. We're going to do something here called a request-driven web service. And then I need to give the service a name. And we'll talk again about our code base and everything in just a bit. I'm going to go ahead and run this. But again, I like to, whenever possible, I don't want to do smoke and mirrors stuff for you all. So I want to make sure that you get to see everything that I'm doing. So this is why I didn't choose to do this part ahead of time. Okay, so it's going to go through, it's going to look at my Docker file that I've already got, and it's going to basically use that to form the basis of it. Oh, I see somebody here from Orange County, California, learning containers. Awesome. We are glad you're here. Hopefully this is exactly the right place for what you need. Now, you can see here, we've actually started the process of a deployment. So this is actually up and running. Now, this is going to make a lot more sense in just a minute, but I wanted to be sure that we actually let this run while we spent some time going back and looking through a bit more of the slides to understand what we're actually doing. So with that said, let me go ahead and let's go ahead and jump into it. So first of all, here's the warning, and I've given this on any talk where we're actually building out cloud-based resources. If you're using your own AWS account and you're not in a sandbox account, just note here that there is a good possibility that if you don't delete these resources, you could have some charges on your AWS account. So I just encourage you, hang in through till the end. We'll talk about how you delete these resources so you don't have any of those charges. So let's actually just dive in here a bit to a spectrum where we're going to talk about how to actually run containers on AWS, because there are so many ways to run containers on AWS. And I am not even covering all of them, but I'm covering the ones that you would use primarily to deploy your container to if you were going to run some type of compute workload in the cloud. So if we had a spectrum here, we could look over here on the far left, we could actually have Lambda. And you might not know this, but you can indeed run containers on Lambda. Well, but if we continue to move down, we're kind of increasing in complexity here, we can then look at a new service, or a relatively new service called App Runner. And this is designed to be a very simplistic way with a service that is entirely about containers to get your container workloads up and running. And we'll be using App Runner some tonight. Then we also have ECS, and specifically using ECS with Fargate. So when you use ECS, if you're running it on Fargate, you don't have to manage any of the underlying instances that make up the cluster that your containers are running on. Now that's contrasted to running ECS on EC2. Now, if you do that, you do have to manage those underlying instances. But then we can start to move into EKS, which is their Elastic Kubernetes service, also with Fargate, where we don't have to manage the underlying instances, and then with EC2, where we do manage the underlying instances. So the thing to understand with this is that really with all these, we're increasing our risk and maintenance by moving to more complex solutions. And if if we need all of that capability, great, we'll use whatever we need, but it's important to understand that there's a lot of different options. Now, you might be here and you might say, oh, I am so excited about Kubernetes. I really want to dive in and learn Kubernetes. I hear everybody talk about it. I know a lot of people are getting certifications in Kubernetes. Well, I want to let you know that we actually did a previous episode where we talked about deploying your first Kubernetes microservice on AWS. This was just a couple months back. So if that's what you want to spend your time doing, you can follow this little short link here on the screen, or the link we'll post in a minute in the chat, and that will actually take you to this episode. You'll get to see me walk through all of this. And for those of you that did join for that episode, what we actually did there was we actually utilized a tool called EKS CTL or EKS Control to actually manage a lot of the configuration and deployment of EKS, because there's a lot of specifics you have to do that right, to actually get that infrastructure up and running. Now, with that being said, when we went through and we did that, that tool really was an opinionated tool for how to set up Kubernetes in AWS. Well, what we're talking about tonight is kind of like that. And that's going to be utilizing the tool of AWS Copilot. And this is a tool, again, it is kind of managed by AWS, but it is open source out there. You can contribute to it and the like. You can go see it on GitHub. But it is a very powerful, opinionated tool, but it doesn't work with Kubernetes. So what this does is it's an opinionated tool specifically for working with AWS native container services. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we look at the AWS native container services, this is where we're talking about App Runner and Fargate and ECS, right? So when we look at Copilot, it's going to work specifically with those services, and in some cases also potentially pull in some other AWS services connecting into those, but that's what we're going to be doing. So this isn't going to apply for Kubernetes, but if you're looking for something to run the AWS native options on, Copilot is going to be a great resource for you to be able to leverage. Now, if we want to actually deploy this, we're going to actually do it here to deploy a container-based microservice to those native services utilizing the Copilot CLI. That's what our episode goal here is. And we're going to do it in a couple different ways. We're actually going to deploy something that will run first on App Runner. Matter of fact, we're actually deploying that right now. That's what's running in the background. And then we're going to actually branch out and we're going to do a deployment utilizing ECS, and we'll utilize some kind of more complex, configuration capabilities that we get with that one over just what we get with App Runner. And we'll talk about what the differences are for those just a little bit. But there's some terminology that I want you to understand if you're working with Copilot. So here's just kind of an image that I've tried to make as simplistic as possible to really help isolate what we're doing here with Copilot. So Copilot, first of all, the highest level of organization that it has is this concept of an application. So your application, let's pretend you were doing, we're actually only going to do a single service here, but let's say maybe you want to deploy a couple of different API services and maybe a front-end service that's going to present maybe like a Next.js application, for example, or something like that. And so if you were doing that, your app, you would have a single application. And then within that, you can have multiple environments. So for example, test versus production, right? And so you could do all of your testing inside of the test environment, and then you could even have a pipeline that will promote things up to the production environment. Now, within those environments, that's where we actually have our cluster that we're working with. And again, it's going to look different depending on whether or not we're deploying for App Runner or whether we're deploying for ECS with Fargate. And so, but it will have that cluster and it will have your VPC if you're utilizing a dedicated VPC. Now, again, for App Runner, it actually is not going to actually go out and create its own VPC and manage kind of like inter-cluster communication with that. But with the others, it will. But within each of those environments, you can have multiple services. I'm showing 2 here, but you could have several. So this just helps you at an high level of understanding when we're talking about applications, environments, and services and how they actually relate one to another. Another feature of Copilot that's actually pretty cool is that you also can actually create continuous delivery pipelines for your services utilizing the AWS developer services along with your source code repository. So, and specifically, we'll be using GitHub here for the repository that we'll be integrating in with, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And you might say, well, what are the developer services? Well, on AWS, we have services like Code Pipeline and Code Build. We'll be using both of these in this episode. You'll actually see that get set up and running. But we also have other services, Code Deploy, Code Artifact, and Code Commit. And these are all services that are designed to kind of help with managing your source code and managing the build process and deployment process. For example, Code Commit is the managed Git repository for AWS. But in this case, we're going to be using GitHub because I know a lot of you are probably using GitHub as your default repository. Now, as a note here, and I'll show you this in just a second, but we actually do have the repository that you can work with here. So let me show you what that is. And I'll also show this link at the end. So don't be too worried about that. You'll get access to it here at the end. But if I bring this up here and I look in this particular repository, what we have is a very simple Node.js application. I've used this before if you've seen previous episodes. This is just an API that utilizes publicly available data about the COVID pandemic. And so you can go in and query things like the data by country for a specific date and the like. So at any point, you could go in and take a look and understand this a little bit more. I mean, really, the Node.js file, the index.js file here is not crazy big. I mean, it's really just about 115 lines that we have to make this whole thing work. But if we look in here, we also have a Docker file that's been configured. So this Docker file will actually run this, and this is what we're actually going to be deploying. And so we should be able to test this out and actually verify that it's working properly once we actually get it up into the cloud. Now, with that being said, I've already forked this repository. So I have created my own, and this is actually completely in line with the one that you'll have access to. So I've done nothing else to it at this point. So this is where we're going to be working and what we're actually going to be doing. But for this to work, we do need to cover some prerequisites, okay? So with that being said, what we're going to need to have, first of all, is you're going to need to have the AWS CLI. Copilot works with the CLI. So when you're doing things like configuring access to your AWS account, you're going to do it in the same way that you would with the AWS CLI. The other thing that you're going to need is you're going to need Docker Desktop. So the Copilot CLI also works with Docker Desktop to handle a lot of things in the building and deployment process. So you need to have that installed as well. Now, we're going to be putting in some information for all of those on how you install those in the chat. So you can actually check that out and make sure that you have these pieces in place before you try to jump into this. And again, you need to also have an AWS account that you have access to. And that could be either from a sandbox account or that could be just an account that you own, control, and manage. So that's what it's going to need to actually make this work. Okay. With all of that in place, let's go ahead and jump back over into VS Code. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead, yes, as a part of this, I'm deploying a test environment, so that's going to get up and running. But I'm going to go ahead and open up a new terminal here, and we're going to get a chance to go through and do some kind of foundational stuff. So the first thing I want you to notice here is that we actually had Copilot installed. So if you actually want to install Copilot, the way that you're going to do this is you're actually going to go in and grab if you have Homebrew, so if you're on a Mac, you can actually run a command to actually install it directly. But if you're not, if you're on Windows or Linux, there are other commands that you can run. So I'm going to jump back over here. We'll just look here on the Copilot documentation site. And if I go to get started here, you can see here that, first of all, as it mentioned, you can use Homebrew to install it. But you also have the option to go through and install manually. And it gives you instructions for doing it for Mac, Linux, both x86 and ARM, and then Windows. So you can follow those instructions to get this installed on your local machine. Now, obviously, I do have it installed already. And so I can actually verify that. I could just run Copilot and be able to get help information out. So it's installed, it's up and running. Everything is good there. So what I want to show you is kind of the result of some of the commands that I ran earlier. So you can see here, this Copilot directory was actually created with the commands that I ran earlier, which were, if you remember, Copilot init, just to get things up and going. And then I answered some questions and it took care of basically creating everything that needed to be created and deploying. So if I look in here, I want to show you a few things. So first of all, here I can see that I have the name of my particular service, which is COVID Data AR for App Runner API. And if I look here, I have a manifest file, and it's going to basically explain some information about my service. First, it's going to list the type, which is request-driven web service. And you might say, okay, well, what is that? Why do these words magically create something? And that's a great question. So what you can do is you can go into here on AWS Copilot CLI. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go under concepts, and we're going to go down to services. And what you'll be able to see when you scroll down is that there are specific types of services that are defined with templates for Copilot. So they don't cover every specific use case. And so there certainly could be a case where maybe you decide that, hey, I don't want to use any of these templates. I just want to, create my own. And if you know how to work with services, you certainly can do that. But in this case, these templates are going to make things quite a bit easier for you because they're going to embrace best practices without you having to know everything about every bit of those. So here, if we look, request-driven web service says it's going to do an app runner service that auto-scales your instances based on incoming traffic and scales down to a baseline where there's no traffic. So this is more cost-effective for HTTP services with sudden bursts in request volume or low request volume. And here, it says that they're not connected by default to a VPC. Okay, so you can configure one, but if you go in and look under, each of these different types, there are different options that you can configure in the manifest file. Okay, and so that's where you can go in and see information about configuring your manifest. So if we go here under request-driven web service, you can see there's a bunch of different options that we can configure with Copilot to make it work a bit differently. So here you can see we're specifying, our health checks and the specific image we're using, the resources that it needs. We're doing environment variables, tags, observability. So all of these are options here within the manifest. So if we go back and look at the manifest that we have, we are giving it our name. We're saying it's building from the Docker file. We give it the port, gives it the resources, and that's all that we have to have configured here. So that's actually what's deploying kind of as we speak. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to go check on that, and we're still building. You can see it's got a lot of different things going here to make this work. So with that being said, we can also go here and look under environments. So we also have configuration for our environment. Now, again, here, there's not as much that we're configuring. This is just going to be a test environment, but we could go in and choose to create multiple environments. We could have test, we could have production, we could have QA, UAT, whatever you want to do, we could have those configured as well. But here you can see that it's going through the process of configuring what we need, and it's still deploying those. But a lot of these things have been completed. But if we were to go into, one second, if we were to go into the AWS console, oops, let me try that again. If we were to go into the AWS console, and I'm going to go ahead and reload this here, and we were to look in CloudFormation, we can see that it's actually deploying, kind of as we speak, CloudFormation templates, following the naming structure that we used previously. So this shows you here that we're actually utilizing CloudFormation behind the scenes to actually make this work. And that's, again, following best practices, but you don't have to know every bit of what's going on. But we could look, for example, and see here that our environment has this particular, you can see test environment there, that actually has its own stack. We also could look at our infrastructure roles. We could look at the stack set, which is going to give us resources that could potentially span across regions, although we're only going to be using a single region here within this particular example. Okay, so let's go back to VS Code, and we're still completing, but we're getting closer to that being in place. And so with that being said, let me show you some of the things that we're actually building. So I'll go back to the console. And if we go and look under App Runner, you can see that we're actually going through the process of actually creating this service, okay? And we actually have our domain that is where it's going to be available. And you don't have to go here to find that. It actually will tell you that when you actually go underneath this, when you finish up the CLI command for Copilot, it will actually tell you, hey, go check out this domain. But we should be able to check and see this is not available yet because we're still in progress, but this will be deployed here in just a minute. We can see here that service creation has started. Okay, so we've gone through the process here of taking our base container and actually getting it up and running with Copilot. But what is this actually going to do? So one of the things I can do just to show you here is I'm just going to run node, and then we'll say index.js, and that's actually going to get everything up and running. And I actually do have a test suite that we can actually take a look at that will actually show us if this is working correctly. And you have access to this as well. It's actually included. But we're just going to run here localhost, and I'm actually using Thunder Client here just to test. And we're going to say port 8080. And I'm just going to save that environment and then go here under collections, say run all. And when I hit run, you can see that all of these different tests that I've included here were successful. Now, what we'll do is we'll actually utilize this once things are up and running in the cloud. We'll make sure that that endpoint that we've actually have deployed through App Runner also is up and running as it's supposed to be. So that's what we actually want to see. So with this being said, we should be able to get the same result once that is done. And let's check and see how that's going. We're still creating there. We are getting closer. So we almost have that in place. So one of the things I want to know is just with what we've done so far, do you guys and girls have any questions on what we've been doing with Copilot in terms of getting it configured to actually deploy our application? So be sure you're thinking about that. Put your notes down in the comments if you have any questions on what we've done so far. And then we'll check back over here real quick. See, we are still very much in progress. So we're almost good to go here. We're getting that up and running. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you about in terms of other ways that we can deploy. So we certainly could just keep using App Runner. Well, why would you not want to use App Runner? Because we've mentioned that services kind of have different levels of complexity. So in terms of App Runner, this is going to be great for basic services where you don't need a ton of configuration. If you don't need to worry about things like service discovery and maybe having backend services. So I see a question come in here about what's the difference to the AWS CDK. That is a great question. I'll cover that in just 1 second. But if you want to do things that are more complex, especially if you're building a multi-service application where you've got a lot of services that maybe need to communicate behind the scenes, they need to communicate within a specific VPC, in a lot of ways at that point, it's going to be easier to work with ECS as opposed to App Runner. So if you're in that boat, you can utilize a different option. You can actually go in and create a load balanced web service. So when you run the Copilot CLI, if you simply select that option, you're going to have a ton of additional configuration that you can actually utilize with that. And if we actually go and take a look, I'll show you kind of the architecture for this. Let's go back under concepts and services. And we can see here that when we're building out a load balanced infrastructure, and let me pull this up so you can see it. Here, we're actually going to be running in an AWS region across multiple availability zones. We have a customized VPC that's been created with multiple public subnets and private subnets. And we're going to use an application load balancer and a target group to actually then spread out the requests across the different services that we have deployed. So you have a lot of additional configuration capabilities when you're working within ECS as opposed to App Runner. And you could utilize that just when you run Copilot, you could choose to select that. Now, there was a great question here. What is the difference to the AWS CDK, which we've also covered here on this show? Well, I think the main difference is just it's a different way to define the infrastructure that you need. So when you're utilizing the CDK, you can create your own infrastructure by writing code, such as JavaScript, .NET, Java, Ruby, Python, Go, so on and so forth. Now, the difference is you have to know exactly what you're going to be creating there, or you need to use some type of template that somebody else has created. The difference in using Copilot is that it also uses CloudFormation at its core, just like the CDK does. But it already has templates configured solely for the purposes of running containers on AWS. So in many ways, it's a little bit easier for you to get started. If you're simply looking to run containers, Copilot's going to help you get there faster than if you were using the CDK. Now, once you become an expert and you have your own opinions about how that infrastructure should be configured, you could certainly look at doing something like utilizing the CDK to create your own infrastructure in that way, if you would like. Although there's also nothing wrong. I know a lot of companies running Copilot to manage their production infrastructure, but that is a great question. I appreciate you asking that. So here we can see that our deployment is done, and you can see here it did give us the URL, and that's what we wanted to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this, the host name, and we'll get there in just a second, but let me go ahead and we'll pull the browser back up. We should be able to see this up and running. And oops, it is not running yet, so we'll give it just a second. It should be up and running here before too long. But if we go in and test, we should be able to see this working. Once that finally gets resolved, I think we'll just have a DNS issue there. But we will get this test up and configured, so we can go under environment, and I'm going to say that we want to actually click on the environment. We're going to change this. We'll change the host name, and we will change the protocol, and we will change the port, and we will hit save. Perfect. And then let me just go ahead and test. We'll see if that has resolved properly. We'll say run all, and we'll hit run, and we can see, oh, no, it hasn't quite resolved just yet, so we'll give it just a second. Now, we'll come back and test this in just a minute, but I want to go ahead and tell you about the next thing that we're going to be configuring while we wait on that DNS to finish resolving here. And that is that we're going to go through the process of creating a continuous delivery pipeline. So what this is going to do is this is going to enable us to basically configure it so anytime that we want to go in and actually deploy our application, all we have to do is push to our source code repository, which if you remember is actually in GitHub. So all we have to do in GitHub is we have to basically go in and just say, hey, we want to run this particular command, or we want to actually push this up, and then it will go through, it will trigger an execution in code pipelines inside of AWS, which will then trigger a build, and it will deploy that update for us. So the reason you do this is you don't want to have it every time that you have some manual process where a human has to come in and actually do this for you, right? This is what we definitely don't want to have happen. So with that being said, we want to be able to make that work properly. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the process for configuring our pipeline. So here, I'm going to go ahead and clear this out, and then I'm going to show you the screen. So here, to actually get this up and running, what we're going to do is we're actually going to say pipeline, Copilot, pipeline init. This means, so pipeline is another of these core concepts, just like we talked about application, and just like we talked about service, and just like we talked about environment. Another one is pipeline. So I'm going to say here, Copilot, pipeline init. We'll keep the default name, and we're actually going to have this be for a workload. And we're going to specify that this is for our test environment. And perfect. So now it's telling us here that we need to do a few things. First of all, we actually have to commit to our source code repository the code that it has generated in that Copilot directory. So we need to go ahead and get that deployed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say git add Copilot. And then let me check here on status. Perfect. So we're going to say git commit -am, and we're going to say adding pipeline. And we will do that. And then we will do git push origin main to push this back to our remote repository. And then off screen here, it's going to ask me if it can use my key. I'm going to say yes. Perfect. So it's now up there. So that was the first step it told us that we needed to do. Now, the next step it told us here is that we need to run Copilot pipeline deploy. So I'm going to go down here and just run that directly, Copilot pipeline deploy. Now, it's going to say, okay, we've actually added this, but then it's going to say, wait a minute, you actually have something you need to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL. We're going to go back to the browser, and I'm going to go ahead and enter in this address here. What it's doing is it's actually developing a connection here between GitHub so that it can actually add in a hook so that it can execute automatically every time that we deploy. So I'm going to click on this, and it's going to say update pending connection. Now, this is going to be fairly easy for me because I've already configured a connection with GitHub. There's already an app that's there. So I'm going to select the app I have that I've already configured. You might have to create a new app instance here. It's a pretty simple process to connect it into your GitHub repository, but I'm just going to go ahead and select this and say connect. Now it's going to go back and say, okay, this connection is now available. So when I go back into VS Code, we can see, great, it's already completed this new pipeline, right? It's already completed this. So we should be able to go back into the browser, and I'm going to search up here for code pipeline. We'll select this, and you can see that I already have a pipeline created. And if I click in on this, you can see that it's already started. So here's the way this works. There are 3 different stages that we have. It's going to pull the source from GitHub, and here it's actually telling me the specific hash of what it's pulling. And you can see here it's even referencing the commit where I said I was adding the pipeline. We also have a build stage here. The build stage is what's actually going to build our container and push it up to ECR, which is our container registry. And then once all of that's done, we're then going to deploy the CloudFormation that will update AppRunner for us. Now you might say, oh, well, I want to see what's going on in the build phase. Well, you can just click here in on details, and you actually can get the running log of everything that's happening in the overall build process. So you can see that's actually working as we speak. So that'll take just a minute to complete. And you can see also that once that's finishes, that this will turn green, assuming it's successful. And you can then go down and you can see the deployment. This will turn blue once it's actually running. So I see a question that came in here. It says, would apps running in containers via Copilot be more expensive than running serverless apps via the CDK? This is a phenomenal question, and one that it's a little hard to answer in some ways. But in short, in most cases, running serverless is going to be less expensive for you. Okay, and part of the reason for that is Lambda does a really great job of scaling down completely to 0. Now you also do have that when you're running in AppRunner, for example, but costs are generally going to be a little bit higher when you're running that because there are instances that are up and running while you're actually waiting on those requests to come in. So I would say in most cases, serverless requests are going to be a little bit less expensive. Now, if you have a huge steady stream of requests that are coming in, there are scenarios where it could end up being potentially a little cheaper to utilize containers in some cases. But again, that's really once we get up to a very, very high scale. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's going to be true all the time, but it's one of the things that, you do need to consider. So I think it's valuable if you're a developer, it's valuable to learn how to do both, how to deploy to Lambda with your serverless workloads. And again, I think the CDK is a great way to do that, as well as a serverless application model or SAM. I also think there are some great other approaches that we can leverage with that in terms of there's other tools, even the serverless framework, for example, there are other tools you can use to actually manage that effectively. Now, what you can do in terms of working with containers, again, I think Copilot becomes a great choice. If you want to work in Kubernetes, EKS-CTL, which we mentioned previously, now that's going to spin up a lot of additional resources beyond what you would need working just with a serverless stack. So there are going to be some extra costs involved, but there are some tools that are there to actually make that easier. So again, appreciate the question. That is a great question. So if we look back at our pipeline, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up so you guys can see it. We can see that the build step has completed, and now we're actually starting the process of deploying out to AppRunner. So all of that's working the way that we would want it to. What I want to do now is I want to show you that if we were to go and push a change, we would see this source trigger again. I want to show you that that connection does exist between GitHub and here. So I'm going to go ahead and open VS Code again. I'm going to go to this index.js file, and I'm just going to update. There's a little version number here. I'm just going to update this to be 1.20, which again, it doesn't really do anything in this case, but I want this will actually trigger what I'm looking for. So now I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say commit-am, and we're going to say updating version. And then we'll do the same as before, git push origin main, which is going to push this up to the remote repository. We'll see that run through. And now when I go back to the browser, we'll give it just a second, and boom, we can see here pretty much instantly it picked that up, and it's actually starting the process of pulling that source. Now, it's interesting to note here, this is actually going on while we're still deploying from CloudFormation. So these stages can run independently, and it would actually wait. So if this completed, and you can see here it does pull in the correct commit, it says updating version. We actually can see this now going into the build phase. If the build phase completes before this deployment completes, it will wait to move into this next stage until this initial step has been completed. So Code Pipeline knows how to effectively manage that. And just as a reminder about the services at play here, The source stage is pulling from GitHub. This build is happening inside of AWS Code Build, and then updating our infrastructure is actually happening because it's creating a change set for our CloudFormation stack here, and it's using CloudFormation to actually deploy those changes out. So if I could actually click here on CloudFormation, and we could see here that it actually is updating a stack, and so we could even go in if we wanted to and see all the steps that are happening here to make this work. So that's actually what takes us through the creation of our pipeline. So we'll give that just a second to finish there. So so with this being said, like let's just tie this together. If you actually have this configured, you have your Docker container, you have some type of a service that you're looking to deploy, you go in and you do Copilot init and you specify the type of workload, you add in all of that configuration, and then it deploys for the first time. Then you can go in and create your pipeline, which then integrates that continuous delivery. And you could do that if you're using a code commit repository, if you're using GitHub, and it actually does that utilizing the connection that we configured with code build. So it's a pretty cool capability to be able to configure all of that without you having to worry about any of it, right? Oh, and I just realized I never actually showed you this working. So let me do that real quick. So I'm going to pull this up here. If we look here, if I open here, I'm in App Runner, and you can see it is updating. But if I click on this, you can see we still have the previous version. This is probably going to be tiny for you, but you can see here it says version 1.1. So in a minute, we should see that update to 1.2. If I go back here to the test that we actually had, if I hit run on these, we can see here, oh, come on. Let me go ahead and close this out and open this up again. There we go, and be sure the environment here is configured properly. Believe that's still the right URL. Let me double check on that. HTTPS, and we'll save. Then we'll go run the collection. And, oh. Interesting. It's having trouble with the host name there. I'll figure out why that's doing that in a minute. But you can see that it is running here properly, so we could actually run these tests manually. I'm not sure why VS Code's having trouble connecting to it for the moment. But with that being said, this again is App Runner, so this is a little bit more of a simplistic approach for running it. But with that being said, you could again have a lot more configuration in moving into ECS, which is another option that we could configure, and we talked about that in terms of the load balanced web service infrastructure. So let me go back here to our code pipeline. We can see here that we're still waiting. We're actually deploying now our second deployment, which this is going to give us the capability to go in and actually see that version number updated. So we'll wait for that to complete here for just a second. Now, as a reminder, in just a second, what I'm going to be going through is I'm going to be talking you through the process of deleting this infrastructure that we've created. So again, I want to encourage you to hang on because we'll get to deleting here in just a minute. But you can even go in, as we mentioned, to App Runner here, we can see that we're updating. So if I go in and I were to go in and look at activity, we can see here that this update process started at 37 minutes past the hour, and so it's still very much in progress. We can see the previous update that we started previously with the first push to the source code repository. So we'll give this just a second to finish up here. Oh, let me actually show you one thing. I meant to show you one additional item here. If we go under pipelines, under our Copilot directory, you can see that we now have two new files that are included. The first one is going to be a manifest file like we saw for the others. So here, this is just going to specify things like, hey, we're going to use GitHub, which we can, again, you can use Bitbucket, GitHub, or code commit. It tells us what branch we're using in the repository, specifies the stages that are going to be used here. Now, we could go in here and do several things. For example, I could actually have it run, npm test, actually run our unit tests for this here as a step where it wouldn't proceed to the next stage unless that was completed. I could also add in things like manual approvals so that if we wanted to actually make sure that we had a manual approval to go from testing environment to production, we can add that in as well. All of that is configurable within the manifest file for our pipeline. But we also have a build spec. And what our build spec is this is what's actually going to be used to actually build our container. And you can see here there's a fair amount going on with this build spec. If for some reason you want to change that build process and make it work differently, The build spec is the file that code build actually uses to perform any steps. So you can go in and add as much configuration as you want to actually make this work for you, depending on what you want to do. But again, obviously note you could break it if you go in and modify the build spec. But just like you can have multiple environments, you also can have multiple pipelines. So if you want to have different pipelines per service, and if you want to actually do that, you would see that there would be a different directory under pipelines for each of those and have your own build spec and manifest file for each of those that would be included. And the way Copilot works is, again, all of this configuration is kept under this Copilot directory. So you check this into your repository, and then especially when you're using pipelines, it would then go pull that, and that's the definition that it will use to evaluate any infrastructure changes since the last commit. So now that we have that in place, let me go ahead and see how we're doing on our deployment here. We are still updating. We'll see if we have the new version yet. Yes, we do. We got our new version 1.20, as we talked about, so we can see that that has worked successfully. So now let's talk about tearing the infrastructure down. So what we want to do here is we actually want to start by saying Copilot, pipeline, we'll deal with the pipeline first, delete. So I'm just going to say, hey, we want to delete the pipeline that we've created for our app. And it'll ask if we're sure. We'll say yes. And now it's going to go through the process of deleting that. This one actually doesn't take a huge amount of time to delete. It'll probably just take like a minute or two here to delete this pipeline. So that'll be gone. We can see, boom, it's done there 13 seconds. So faster than what I said. The next thing that I want to do here is I actually want to show you how we would delete all the infrastructure that we've spun up for this example with App Runner. So I can go to Copilot. I'm going to say app and delete. And it's going to ask us yet again if we want to confirm that we are deleting. I'm going to say yes. We're going to confirm this. And now it's going to go through the process of deleting. Now, we're not going to stay through all of this part because this part will take probably about 8 minutes or so for all of this to be completed. But I do want to show you that that's how you go through and delete this. And if we were to go back in and look in the AWS console, and we were to go back under CloudFormation, which we have pulled up over here, and I'm looking at my stacks, you're going to start to see that over time, some of these are going to be actually shifting over to deleting. Now, it's not there yet because it's performing a few kind of preliminary steps. Here we can see cleanup in progress. So we can see it's starting the process of working with these stacks. But once we're done, all the ones that are tied to this application will be gone. So that's what we're shooting for. Now, let's talk for a minute here, because ultimately what I want you to do is I want you to be able to go and do some of this yourself and let me know how it went. So I want to remind you, you can get to the repository utilizing this link. This will give you a great base service just to start with, and you'll be able to test this out and verify that it's working properly for you. So you can deploy to App Runner. If you want to go through, you could actually utilize that the load balanced web service as well. So you could actually use that and see it working within ECS. That would just be one little configuration change you make when you run Copilot init. And so that would be something you can test out yourself, and you still would delete it the same way, even if you chose to go with the ECS option. So we've covered quite a bit here. Again, we've been able to take a base project, get it up and running in the cloud, and set it up to be continuously delivered, utilizing, in this case, App Runner and those developer services, which would be code pipelines and code build. So I'm curious, we've gone through a lot. What questions do you have? Feel free to go ahead and type those in here if you have any questions. Another thing that I'll go ahead and ask, if you have something you want us to cover next month, it'll be our last episode of the year. We want to do something that everybody wants to see. So if there's a topic that maybe we haven't covered so far on Cloud Builder Live here in 2022, or maybe this is your first episode and there's something you really want to know about, you don't even know the other episodes we've done, no problems there either. Go ahead and throw that in if there's anything you want us to cover. And you can always message that to me as well. Again, you can find me on Twitter at _DavidTucker_. And just shoot me a message, and we'll definitely consider any requests that you all send to us in terms of what you want to see here on Cloud Builder Live. Well, I don't think I see any questions right now, so I thank all of you for joining me here on Cloud Builder Live. Again, I think we got a lot done tonight. Hopefully you'll go and check out AWS Copilot for yourself. You'll deploy your own container workloads into the cloud. And I also want to encourage you, just keep pushing in, keep learning new things, keep working in the cloud. And you can come back and find us next month here on Cloud Builder Live, where we'll be giving you yet another skill, yet another new thing that you can leverage in what you're building in the cloud.